It is said that on certain nights, when the world grows quiet and the sea forgets its roar, the moon does not follow the path we know. It drifts, it lingers, it pauses over one lonely stretch of coast, as if remembering something it once loved and lost. On those nights, the shoreline is hushed by dusk, and the air feels as thin as a whispered prayer. Waves arrive with a softer touch, as though they are careful not to disturb what sleeps below. The sand is cool beneath bare feet, and out beyond the tide line, the water holds a strange luminance, like a breath caught between waking and dreams. Beneath that drifting glow, a question stirs like a soft tide. What memory sleeps beneath the tides of forgotten time? If you stand there long enough, it is said, your eyes begin to adjust to the gentle shimmer on the surface. The moon's reflection stretches and breaks, and in the delicate trembling of light, faint shapes seem to emerge. Lines, angles, shadows not quite belonging to the sea. Whispers tell us that a city once lived here. A city of lantern light and quiet prayers. A city that learned to speak with the sky. Long before our own maps were drawn, before our calendars gave names to days, a people settled along this shore. They built their homes of pale stone quarried from the cliffs, stone that held the memory of ancient seabeds and forgotten shells. Their streets wound gently toward the water, tapering into narrow steps that disappeared beneath the tide. At dusk, their doorways glowed with soft lamps of oil and carved crystal, and voices murmured in low, steady tones, as if conversation itself were a ritual of calm. They were not a people of war, nor of empire. They left behind no tales of conquest, no records of kings. Their power, if it can be called that, was quieter. It lay in how they watched the heavens. To them, the night sky was not merely a scattering of light, was a vast scroll, unfurled each evening by unseen hands. Each star, a mark of ink. Each constellation, a phrase in a language only patience could read. Their astronomers, though they would not have used that word, climbed stone terraces and temple roofs with the setting sun at their backs. Wrapped in simple garments, they would sit in silence, waiting for the first star to appear. They did not look for omens of war, nor predict the rise and fall of rulers. They searched for gentler meanings, the promise of seasons, the turning of tides, the slow heartbeat of the world. It is said they believed the moon was no mere companion of the earth, but a guardian spirit. Not a god to be feared, nor a distant light to be measured, but a watchful presence. One that listened, one that remembered. They called it, in their soft tongue now lost to us, a word that meant both mother and mirror. A being that took the light of the Ain sun and softened it, cradling it in cool hands before passing it down to those who dreamed and grieved and hoped beneath. In courtyards open to the sky, they carved their sky maps into pale stone. Not flat, as we might imagine, but spiraled and layered. More like the inside of a shell than a simple chart. Stars were marked not only by position, but by feeling. Some were etched deeper, as if they pressed more heavily upon human hearts. Others were left faint, delicate, barely touching the surface, like distant thoughts. If you could descend through the water tonight, if you could walk beside the fish and the drifting threads of seaweed, you might find the remains of those carved stones. You might trace a fingertip along grooves worn soft by centuries of waves, finding that the lines still flow, still spiral, still point upward toward constellations that have shifted and yet somehow remain. The temples of this shoreline city were not grand in the way of empires. They did not reach to the heavens in defiance. They opened to the sky in invitation. Pillars circled wide courtyards where the moonlight could fall without obstruction, painting the stone in shades of silver and faint blue. On certain nights, when the wandering moon sat low and full over the water, the entire temple would shimmer. The lines of the carvings, the edges of the steps, the faces of quiet statues, all outlined in a glow so soft it seemed to come from within the stone itself. Here, under that tender light, their rituals unfolded. There were no loud chants, no blazing fires. Instead, they practiced a kind of sacred listening. Old and young together, they would lie on the cool stone floor, heads turned toward the open sky, breathing in unison with the hush of the sea. It is said that they believed the moon carried the memories of all who had ever lived, tucked gently into its shadowed plains. To listen to the moonlight, they thought, was to listen to the soul of the world. Their calendars were circles, not lines. Their sense of time moved like the tide, returning always to what had been before. They measured their lives by the moon's growing and fading, watching its phases as one might watch the changing expressions of a beloved face. When it was full, their festivals were not of noise, but of shared quiet. They would place small bowls of water on flat stones, letting the moon reflect within them, as if giving the night sky a second, smaller home. And so it went, for years that became centuries, for generations whose names have slipped away like foam left behind on sand. Yet beneath this serenity, something subtle was shifting. The people who read the stars began to notice that certain constellations no longer matched the old carvings. Lines that once aligned perfectly with temple walls and carefully placed windows began to wander. A star that had reliably crowned a pillar at midsummer now hovered slightly to one side. The rising moon no longer passed directly over a certain sacred arch, but arrived askew, as if stepping out of rhythm. At first, these changes were small, easy to ignore, like the first faint lines at the corner of an aging face. But with each passing year, the misalignment grew. The sky maps etched into stone began to disagree with the living sky above. Temples that had been built to hold a particular beam of moonlight at a precise moment of the year now sat in shadow where they should have glowed. Soft contradictions emerged. Some of the star readers believed the heavens themselves were changing, shifting their patterns as a kind of cosmic exhale. Others whispered that it was not the stars that moved, but understanding that had grown flawed. Old rituals had been forgotten. Small errors had crept into their calculations like dust into an unwatched room. There were those who said the moon had grown restless. Marked by the moon, they had once said with pride, tracing the silver reflections upon their stones. Now some spoke the phrase in a quieter tone, as if it carried a new weight. If the moon was a guardian spirit, then why was it drifting from its appointed paths? Why did its light strike the temples at angles never intended, casting new shadows where there should have been familiar comfort? Inscriptions from this time, those few that scholars claim to interpret, speak of a fading heartbeat. Not a physical heart, but the rhythm between earth and sky, between water and stone. Lines of text curl like waves, telling of dreams filled with disordered constellations, of tides arriving in uneasy patterns, of birds migrating along strange routes, confused by a sky that no longer sang the old songs. It is said that on one particular night, long remembered in fragments and echoes, the horizon dimmed in an unfamiliar way. The sun set not in its usual blaze of fading gold, but behind a veil of strange dust, turning the whole shoreline a muted, sorrowful hue. The moon rose late, as if reluctant. When it did appear, it followed no path the star readers recognized. It wandered, higher, then lower, nearer to the sea, then strangely distant. Its reflection on the water broke into restless fragments. Some believed this was a sign of divine displeasure, that the guardian had turned its face away. Others thought it a message, that time itself was loosening, that the cycles they had trusted were not foundations, but gentle agreements, easily dissolved. And there are those, dreamers mostly, who whisper a different story. They say it was the city that grew restless, that beneath the lanterns and the quiet prayers, beneath the carved stones and the patient watching, a deep weariness had taken root. When a people come to know the sky too well, when every star has a name and every movement a meaning, perhaps a strange ache begins to grow, the ache of having no mystery left. Some accounts hint that the city's last generation felt an emptiness the old ritual could not fill. The sky, once a living scroll of unending wonder, had become a familiar text, read and reread until its edges blurred. So, they say, the city made a choice. A choice not written in any surviving script, not carved into stone, but carried out in silence. The sea had always been their companion. Its tides shaped their days. Its presence cooled their evenings. Beneath the surface, caves and crevices reached inward, vanishing under the stone foundations of their homes. Perhaps it began with a tremor, a small sigh in the earth, a faint settling of ground that no one noticed at first. Foundations that were once firm began to soften. Water found new pathways. Cracks appeared in temple floors, not in harsh lines, but in slow, meandering curves, like rivers drawn by an unseen hand. Lanterns were moved higher. Steps leading to the sea vanished sooner beneath the tide than they had in the past. There is no record of panic, no stories of hurried exodus or desperate escape. Instead, the last inscriptions grow quieter, shorter, more like closing lines than frantic warnings. It is as though the city sank not in terror, but in resignation. Not with a scream, but with a sigh. One by one, the lamps were extinguished. One by one, the doorways darkened. The moon watched, wandering in its unfamiliar path as water crept along streets that had once glowed with reflected starlight. The temples, aligned so carefully with constellations now drifting, received the sea like a final rite. Waves filled the courtyards where people had lain in stillness, gazing upward. Statues that had listened for the sky now listened to the murmur of currents and the soft rasp of sand. The carved sky maps, circles within circles, spirals of time and feeling, were slowly veiled beneath layers of salt and silt. And then, one night, the city was gone. No stones remained upon the sand. No wall stood above the shore. To those who arrived later, seeking land or fortune, there was nothing to mark that a people had once read the stars here and spoken to the moon in reverent murmurs. Nothing, except for nights like this one, nights when the wandering moon pauses, hovering a little lower over the water, casting its reflection in a way that does not quite match the waves. When the tide pulls back just far enough to suggest impossible shapes, perhaps the hint of a staircase, perhaps the shadow of a broken arch, perhaps nothing at all. Beneath the silence, something feels present, a memory held in the breath of the sea. Perhaps it was never meant to be found. Perhaps the city chose the mercy of forgetting, sinking itself into a place where only dreams could reach. Or perhaps it trusts that one day, when hearts are quieter, when our hunger for certainty softens, someone will stand on this shore and listen, truly listen to the soft conversation between moon and tide. Some voices only echo when we are ready to hear them. So if you find yourself there, on that hushed shoreline beneath the drifting glow, you might close your eyes. You might let the cool air settle over your skin, and the slow rhythm of the waves become your own. You might imagine lanterns shining once more beneath the surface, streets breathing gently in the deep carved stones still tracing the paths of the stars, and then as sleep approaches, you might hold a simple thought. There are histories that do not live in books or in names. They live in the spaces between waves, in the wandering of the moon, in cities that chose to become silence, so that mystery itself could go on breathing. Where memory fades, the sea remembers, and somewhere beneath the water's quiet veil, the city beneath the wandering moon continues its long secret dream. It is said that in the quiet places of the world, those corners where wind grows thoughtful and the earth seems to breathe with a slower pulse, there stands a gate carved from a single mass of ancient stone. A solitary arch rising gently from a field of pale morning mist, as though the land itself once attempted to speak and left behind the shape of a whispered syllable. At first glance, it appears almost too simple to hold any mystery. A single curve, a weathered surface, a frame with nothing inside but drifting vapor and the soft blush of dawn. But those who have wandered this far, those who have watched the horizon pale with first light, tell a different story. Whispers tell us that when the earliest rays touched the inner edge of that arch, something within the stone stirred. A faint quiver, a hush turning inside out, then a sound, if sound is the right word at all. A low hum, deep and round, like the earth remembering a name it once knew. A soft echo that felt older than mountains, older than wind, older even than the silence before creation. Travelers would pause in mid-step, feeling that trembling note move through them like a slow breath. Animals refused to cross the misted field, watching instead from the shadows of distant trees. Some swore the light that passed through the archway took on a different color, subtler, warmer, as though dawn itself had decided to rest for a moment within the stone. Tonight, or perhaps this morning, time feels uncertain in such places. You and I step closer. We enter the hush that gathers around the ancient arch. We breathe with it. We listen. Long before this field became a cradle of mist, long before shepherds carried their flocks across the soft grass, a people lived here whose lives followed the rhythm of the rising sun. Their homes now crumbled into mere suggestions beneath the earth, once circled this gate in wide arcs of reverence. To them, the first light of day was not simply another shift in the sky. It was a ceremony, an unveiling of the world renewed. They believed that dawn carried the breath of creation, that in its first quiet glow, the world remembered how it began. And so, they greeted each sunrise with rituals of stillness. These were not rituals of fire or noise, no drums, no chants. Instead, They gathered in silence, turning their faces toward the horizon, allowing the newborn light to wash across their features. Some held smooth stones carved with spirals, turning them gently in their palms. Others simply placed a hand upon the earth, as if greeting an old friend awakening from a deep sleep. And always, at the center of these quiet gatherings, stood the gate. It was carved with sacred precision, shaped so delicately that even after centuries of wind and rain, its curve remains smooth beneath the fingertips. Symbols once adorned its sides, traces of them still linger as faint shadows in the stone. Spirals, echoing the motion of stars. Crescent shapes that hint at lunar reverence. Lines that draw upward, as though reaching for some celestial truth. What purpose did the gate serve? No one can say with certainty. Some believe it was a celestial instrument, a way for these ancient people to measure the changing seasons by the angle of early light. They argue that the positioning of the arch aligns too perfectly with the summer solstice to be coincidence. At dawn on that day, the sun rises directly through its heart, striking the earth beyond in a narrow path of gold, like a thread connecting heaven to soil. Others claim it was symbolic, a doorway for souls, a passage through which the spirits of the departed could step from darkness into dawn, guided by the gentle hand of the rising sun. According to this view, the gate was less an architectural achievement and more a prayer made of stone, a way for the living to acknowledge the invisible, honoring the boundary between presence and memory. And then there are those who speak of a vanished kingdom, a name once carried by wind, now lost to dust and silence. They imagine the arch as the last remnant of a city that flourished at the edge of dawn, where every morning was greeted like a visiting deity. Some say the people disappeared when the sun faltered, when unseasonable storms shrouded their rituals and turned their sacred fields to mud. Others say they simply walked through the gate and did not return, following some call that only they could hear. Whatever the truth, the land holds its silence well. As the listener, you step closer now, letting your breath mingle with the chill hanging in the air. The mist curls around your ankles like gentle fingers, guiding rather than hindering. Your hand moves to the surface of the stone. It is cool, as if holding a memory of the long night. Yet there is a warmth just beneath it, something that stirs faintly, like a heartbeat deep in slumber. It is said that those who place their palm upon the arch at this hour, just before the sun breaks, sometimes hear a second echo. Not the low hum that once vibrated through the field, but something softer, more intimate. A whisper, perhaps. A breath exhaled not by stone, but by something listening within it. Some dismiss these tales as workings of the imagination, tricks of light and expectation. Yet the shepherds who graze their flocks near here tell their stories with eyes that wander unconsciously toward the arch, as though expecting it to stir even as they speak. A wandering monk once described the gate as the morning's ear, claiming it gathered the world's first sounds and returned them, transformed, to those who approached with sincerity. A dreamer from a distant land wrote in his journal that passing beneath the arch was like stepping into a moment not yet formed, a breath held between two worlds. There are even legends of wanderers who claimed the gate opened into realms where dawn did not simply rise but walked, a living spirit, a traveler between shadows and light. Those who insist such visions were real speak with quiet conviction, explaining how the mist beneath the arch thickened not with moisture, but with possibility. How the light shimmered as though stitched with threads of gold and pale blue, colors not found in ordinary mornings. And perhaps their stories are true, or perhaps they are dreams given voice. But what difference is there truly between a dream deeply believed and a truth softly hidden? We linger here now, letting the mist rise, letting the sky grow paler. The horizon begins to widen with a thin wash of silver blue. Birdsong builds slowly, cautiously, like a hymn, unsure of its own words. And then the sun lifts, shy at first, then braver. A narrow ray touches the arch. Just a kiss of light, a tremble, a glow along the inner curve. And for a moment, whether by memory, by myth, or by something else entirely, you feel a vibration beneath your fingertips. A low, culling note, as though the stone remembers what it once was, what it was meant to be. The echo does not last. It fades quickly, like a sigh released into dawn. But something within you shifts. A small opening, a hollow that feels tender, almost sacred. Perhaps that is the true purpose of the Gate of Echoes, not to reveal another world, but to remind you of the spaces within yourself that quiet daylight often overlooks. The places where memory lingers, where questions rest without need of answers, where wonder breathes with slow, unhurried grace. For some doorways do not open outward, they unfold inward. And so, as the sun rises fully, dissolving the last of the mist, the arch stands silent once more. No hum, no shimmer, just stone, weathered and patient. Some might think it lifeless, but you have felt the breath within it. You have heard its faint echo, even if only for a moment. And that is enough, for perhaps it was never meant to be found in the ordinary way. Perhaps it opens only to those who carry quiet within them. Perhaps some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. As dawn brightens, as the world awakens around you, the ancient gate fades gently into the day. Still standing, still waiting, still whispering through its silence. A doorway that may never open, or may still be waiting for the one who remembers how to listen. It is said that in the most remote reaches of the desert, where the wind moves like an ancient voice and the horizon wavers like a half-remembered dream, there lies a place where the earth keeps its deepest secrets. A place where dunes wander not at random, but as though guided by an old and patient will. Where sand drifts downward like golden snowfall, burying and revealing in slow cycles of breath. And beneath that ever-moving veil, whispers tell us something sleeps. Something built long before our own histories began. Something the desert has chosen to keep. A single question drifts through the desert's quiet breath. What wisdom lies beneath the dunes that never cease to wander? Tonight, as dusk cools the sand and the sky softens into shades of copper and dust blue, we begin our journey there. At the edge of a sea of shimmering gold, the air is still, yet it feels alive as if countless grains lean in to listen. The dunes ripple gently, their slopes shifting under the faintest breeze. And just beneath their surface, something unmoving waits, steady as bone, patient as the moon. You might stand here a long time before noticing it. A line in the sand that does not quite match the wind's pattern. A small rise with edges too straight to be natural. A faint glimmer where the sun touches something darker than stone. But once you see these hints, you cannot unsee them. You begin to sense the outline of something vast beneath the surface, an unseen structure buried far below. Travelers who crossed this desert centuries ago spoke of a hidden library, swallowed by storms. They spoke of nights when the wind lifted just enough sand to reveal dark pillars, carved steps descending into shadow, and the tops of arches that vanished again by morning. They claimed the library was not lost, but deliberately concealed, tucked within the earth by those who feared what it held. Some dismissed these tales as mirages, born of thirst and heat. Yet, the stories persisted, passed from caravan to caravan, murmured between wanderers at shrinking wells, written in crumbling journals, left behind in abandoned oases. All describe the same vision, a labyrinth beneath the dunes, a sanctuary of knowledge, a place where scrolls whispered secrets of early civilizations, truths too vast for waking minds. Tonight, the desert seems to acknowledge your presence. A slow gust moves across the plain, lifting a sheet of sand that glitters like gold dust. And for a moment, the outline sharpens. Ruined pillars rise barely above the surface, their tops worn smooth by centuries of abrasion. They stand like broken teeth in the mouth of time, fragments of an entrance that once welcomed travelers of another age. Their stone is unusually dark, almost charcoal, as though it once held inscriptions now long erased. Not far from them, scattered across a shallow depression, lie shards of obsidian ink jars. Their glossy surfaces catch the last light of day, turning it into thin halos of blue and violet. They look strangely unweathered, as though they belong not to the past but to some time outside of time. Beside one shard rests a broken piece of carved stone. At first glance, it resembles an inscription, but the markings do not form letters, not of any known language. They curve like constellations. They spiral like the patterns found on ancient shells. Stars, perhaps, or thoughts, or something between the two. You brush the sand from it gently. It feels warm, even as night approaches, almost as though it remembers the hands that etched it. As the desert darkens, legends rise like cool air from the ground. They speak of the scholars who once tended the hidden library. Scholars who believed knowledge was not an object to hoard, but a living spirit. Something with breath, with longing, with a will of its own. According to these tales, the scholars walked beside this spirit, treating it as a companion rather than a tool. They believed that learning required humility, that wisdom was not something taken, but something offered, something given only to those who approached with gentleness and sincerity. The scrolls they guarded were said to contain the oldest truths known to humankind. Not histories of kings or battles, but deeper stories, of how the world learned to speak, of how stars chose their places in the sky, of how thoughts first took shape in the minds of wandering ancestors. Some scrolls, it was whispered, described things that had not yet happened. Others recorded events that occurred before time had memory, and still others carried instructions, rituals for understanding the universe not with the mind, but with the soul. To protect this knowledge, the scholars built their library beneath the earth, carving it into chamber after chamber of cool stone. They left only a few pillars and a narrow stairway visible above ground, enough to guide the worthy but too subtle to invite the careless. Their intention was not secrecy, but balance. They feared what the world might do if such truths were misused. For they believed that knowledge, like fire, warms only when respected. When held too tightly or wielded without care, it burns, it destroys, it consumes. So they hid the library, and the desert, ever loyal to those who love silence, wrapped it in layer upon layer of drifting sand. Even now, as you listen, you might feel the urge to imagine what lies beneath your feet. Picture a long corridor stretching into darkness, walls lined with shelves carved directly from bedrock. Perhaps small alcoves hold clay jars filled with rolled parchment, their edges still dusted with moonlight. Maybe the air down there remains cool, untouched by the relentless heat above. A soft wind might move through the passageways, carrying the dry scent of old ink and forgotten stories. Imagine stepping deeper, past collapsed archways whose fallen stones are etched with spirals, past rooms large enough to hold gatherings, their ceilings supported by pillars carved with celestial patterns, past alcoves where candles once flickered, leaving faint soot halos on the walls. And then, deeper still, into the heart of the library, a circular chamber, silent asleep, lit only by the faintest glow from cracks high above where the sand shifts like drifting clouds. Here, legends say, lay the greatest scrolls, not written with ink, but with dust pressed into thin sheets of stone. Their words, if they can be called words, formed not by strokes, but by indentations that resembled ripples on water. Scholars claimed these texts could be read only under lunar light, and that they revealed their truths slowly, like a whisper leaning close to the ear. Some pilgrims who reached this chamber insisted the walls breathed, that if you stood very still, you could hear a soft heartbeat, not of a person, but of the earth itself. Others described the strange sensation of being watched, not with suspicion, but with quiet curiosity. Perhaps knowledge itself was the watcher. Perhaps wisdom has eyes we cannot see. Yet no one knows what became of the scholars. Their names faded. Their city vanished. Their stairway into the earth collapsed long ago, swallowed whole by shifting dunes. Some believe they perished in a great storm that buried the entrance faster than they could escape. Others think they sealed the library willingly, entrusting the desert to guard what humankind was not yet ready for. But there is a third tale, rarely spoken aloud, a tale of departure. It suggests that as the scholars' understanding grew deeper, they learned a truth so profound it altered the course of their lives. Some say they followed a map not drawn on parchment, but written in the night sky. Others say they simply dissolved into the desert wind, carried away like fine grains of sand, returning to the breath of the world from which they came. Whichever story holds the truth, or whether all are true in different ways, the desert remains their keeper. And so the library sleeps, cradled beneath falling sand, not lost, not destroyed, simply resting, waiting for the one who will listen with humility, the one who will ask not for power, but for understanding. Night deepens. Stars emerge in slow procession, mirroring the etched fragments at your feet. The wind quiets as though preparing for sleep. You kneel beside one of the half-buried pillars. Your hand brushes its surface. The stone is cool, but beneath its coolness lies something warm, like a memory pressing upward through time. For a moment, you imagine the ground shifting, a grain of sand slipping away, a faint breath rising from below. Perhaps the library stirs. Perhaps it recognizes the presence of someone listening, someone patient, someone gentle. But as quickly as the sensation comes, it fades. The desert gives nothing more. It returns to its ancient stillness, holding its secrets close. Beneath the silence, something remains. Something vast and unmoving. Something that hums with unrealized possibility. Perhaps some knowledge is meant to sleep. Not forever. Just until the world grows quiet enough to receive it. Until hearts soften. Until minds learn to bow before wonder rather than chase certainty. Where memory fades, wisdom rests. And beneath the falling sand, the library waits. Patient as dusk, ancient as breath, cradled in the deep and sacred silence of the desert. A secret preserved not by walls or doors, but by the drifting veil of time itself. It is said that far beyond the last curve of familiar coastline, beyond the reach of harbours, beyond the nets of fishermen, beyond the murmur of known waters, there lies a quiet expanse of the sea where the world feels older. The waves move with a slower rhythm, as though guided by memories rather than winds. The air carries a soft shimmer, like sunlight filtered through a veil of time. And rising from this tranquil blue, half drowned yet impossibly serene, stand a series of pale pillars worn smooth by centuries of tide and salt. They emerge from the ocean with the grace of forgotten gods, lean, bowed, but unbroken. Their reflections tremble gently on the surface, as though the sea itself is uncertain whether to reveal them or to swallow them whole. Between them, light refracts in delicate shards, scattering across the water like broken starlight. At certain hours of the morning, when dawn has only just begun to open its eyes, these shards drift through the air in quiet spirals, landing on the pillars with the faintest kiss of silver-blue glow. This is where our journey begins. Here, at the temple where light learned to break. Whispers tell us that long before charts marked these waters, before compasses found their north, a seafaring people made this place the heart of their world. They were not conquerors. They did not carve their power onto coins or monuments. Instead, they watched the horizon with reverence, believing every sunrise carried a sacred message, a gentle reminder that creation flowed not from might, but from illumination. To them, light was not merely a phenomenon. It was a spirit, a visitor, a guide. And so they built a temple to honor the moment light first touched the world. A moment they imagined as an awakening, a soft inhalation before the first breath of life, a hush before the first sound. They gathered stones from distant shores, carrying them across waters that glittered with moon-pooled tides. Each stone was carved with spirals, mimicking the shape of bogs, patterns that echoed shells, currents, and celestial swirls. No sharp angles, no harsh lines, only curves, because they believed truth does not move in straight paths. The pillars we see now rising from the sea were once the outermost ring of this temple. Their tops once held lanterns of glass-like coral, lit not by flame, but by the sun's first touch. When dawn arrived, the temple glimmered like a bowl of liquid gold, its surfaces shimmering with quiet brilliance. The people who worshipped here spoke softly. They performed rituals in silence, letting the sea and sky be their voice. They believed that the less one spoke, the more clearly one heard the world's ancient thoughts. If you step closer now, drifting over the gentle swell of water, perhaps on a small boat, perhaps simply with the imagination guiding your breath, you begin to see the temple's shape beneath the waves. The sea is calm, nearly still, as though it remembers the presence of those who built this place. Look down, through the shifting blue. You will see it, the faint outline of chambers hidden just beneath the surface. Some appear as dark corridors leading into the earth. Others open into wide rooms where the water glows faintly, as though lit by embers long extinguished in the world above. In the deepest chambers, the walls are covered in inscriptions, not letters, but flowing marks that resemble tides frozen into stone. They spiral inward, then outward, repeating like breath. Scholars who have glimpsed drawings of these markings argue endlessly about their meaning. Some insist they are a form of celestial script. Others claim they map the rhythm of the sea. A few whisper that the symbols change depending on where the sun stands in the sky, shifting subtly as the light bends through water and touches the stone. The idea unsettles some, enchants others, and comforts a few who believe the world is not meant to be fully understood. To enter the temple, you must allow yourself to slip into a slower frame of mind. The sea demands it. The ruins encourage it. The light itself seems to soothe your thoughts, breaking them into softer pieces, much like the temple's ancient design intended. Imagine gliding across the water toward the first set of pillars. They rise around you like guardians of memory, silent, gentle, watchful. Between them, the surface brightens, and you begin to see thin beams of refracted sunlight floating upward through the water. They form shifting mosaics along the pillars, patterns that ripple and change with each subtle movement of the sea. Some say these beams are echoes of the original rituals, that when the priesthood once stood here, raising their palms to welcome the newborn sun, the light passed through their hands and broke like water around their bodies. The temple's builders, it is believed, understood how to invite light to behave differently, to shimmer, to fold, to pause. In one of the submerged chambers, divers have described a strange phenomenon. Even in complete darkness, a faint glow lingers on the walls, as though the stone itself remembers light and refuses to let it go. More than one diver reported that the glow pulsed, slowly, like a heartbeat. Whether this is imagination or something more profound, no one can say. The temple keeps its silence. As the stories deepen, you begin to hear of the priesthood, the quiet order that once tended the temple's inner halls. They wore garments woven from sea-harvested fibers, soft and translucent, so that dawn's glow could pass through them. Their hair was said to smell faintly of salt and wind, and their songs, though rarely heard, were whispered to resemble the rising tide. Their duty was not to preach or command, but to listen, to observe how light moved, to understand how it revealed and concealed in equal measure. For they believed that every truth cast two shadows, one clear, one hidden, one meant for the waking world, one meant for the dreaming soul. Visitors who came seeking answers were led through corridors lined with pale stone. In each room, the priesthood showed them how light changed shape, sometimes breaking upon the wall as though it were water, sometimes bending around a curve as though drawn by an unseen force, sometimes splitting into delicate streams like ripples in a pond. The priests understood these movements as messages, not from gods, but from light itself. They said the world began with illumination, and thus all things carried a memory of that moment. Their role was simply to interpret these memories. And then, one morning, quietly, inexplicably, they vanished. A visiting traveler described arriving at the temple to find every corridor empty. every lantern extinguished, every surface cold. He wandered the halls for hours, calling out, listening to his voice echo back without answer. The chambers remained as they were, pristine, undisturbed, but the priesthood was gone. No journal was left behind, no final ritual marks, no signs of struggle, only the shifting inscriptions on the walls, patterns that seemed to change by the minute, as though the stone wanted to communicate something, but no longer had a listener who understood its language. Some claim the priesthood walked into the sea, following a path of refracted light only they could see. Others believe the temple itself absorbed them, folding them into its chambers like memories stored away for safekeeping. Still others whisper that light, in its first moment, learned to break, and in doing so, learned to call them home. You drift deeper into the narrative now, letting the temple fill your senses. The water laps against the pillars with soft, rhythmic sighs. A gentle breeze brushes your skin with traces of salt and sun-warmed stone. Above, clouds drift like slow-moving thoughts. Below, the ruins glow faintly in response. The temple's design begins to feel less like architecture and more like a meditation in stone. Each line and angle guiding the eye toward a calmer rhythm. Each chamber inviting the mind to loosen its grip on certainty. For here, nothing is fixed. Light bends, water sings, stone remembers. This place does not offer answers. It offers reflections. As the chapter nears its close, you begin to sense the tide shifting, not abruptly, not with force, but with the steady inevitability of breath. The water rises a little, curling around the base of the pillars. The light changes angle, scattering into broader, softer shapes. The glow beneath the waves dims, then brightens again in slow, thoughtful pulses. It feels, for a moment, like the sea itself is cradling the temple, rocking it gently, like a memory it refuses to let go. And you wonder, was this place ever meant to be understood? Was its purpose ever meant to be fixed? Or was it always meant to shift, like light itself? Perhaps the temple was never built to reveal truths, but to remind us that truth is a living thing, that it moves, that it hides, that it bends when touched by time, or water, or longing. Perhaps the priesthood did not vanish at all. Perhaps they simply stepped into the kind of illumination the waking world cannot perceive. The tide sighs one last time against the stone. The light fractures into a final shimmer of broken stars. And the temple, half seen, half sensed, settles once more into its long, sacred silence. Where memory fades, wonder remains. And beneath the gentle cradle of the sea, the ocean temple continues to dream, its purpose soft, its meaning fluid, its light forever learning how to break. It is said that in a quiet corner of the world, far from the sound of cities, far from the reach of roads that know the weight of modern feet, there lies a path woven of stone, moss, and memory. You might come upon it by accident, as stepping past a curtain of low branches, or slipping through a clearing where the forest exhales its cool breath into the early evening air. At first glance, the road seems unremarkable. Just a winding trail of stones, half buried beneath green moss and twilight shadow. But linger a moment, listen, and you may hear something faint beneath the hush of leaves. A hum, a breath, the soft murmur of forgotten stories rising from the soil. Some believe the forest keeps watch over this ancient way, guarding it with branches that bend low and shadows that deepen at dusk. Others say the road itself is alive, dreaming in its sleep, waiting for footsteps that will never return. And tonight, as the light fades and the world slips towards stillness, we step gently onto the path that was once a pilgrimage route. A road built by a quiet civilization whose devotion was carried not in words or monuments, but in the act of walking, each step a prayer, each footfall a respectful whisper pressed into the skin of the earth. The path curves softly, like the arc of a crescent moon laid upon the ground. Its stones are smooth and cool beneath the encroaching moss, worn by centuries of travel, then left untouched for twice as long. Some stones are cracked, their fractures filled with soil and delicate ferns. Others tilt at subtle angles, as though slowly bowing to the weight of time. Above us, branches weave an archway of shadow and starlight. The forest hums, not with noise, but with presence, with breath, with the trembling echo of lives once lived among these trees. The people who built this road lived simply, their houses constructed from timber and clay, their villages small and closely tied to the land. They believed deeply in the practice of movement. To walk was to remember. To walk was to join one's life to the slow pulse of the earth. Their rituals centered not around temples or towering statues, but around journeys. Pilgrims would rise before dawn, touch their foreheads to the ground, and begin their travels in silence. Each traveler carried only a small satchel. Inside it, a handful of herbs, a strip of woven cloth, and a single stone from home. That stone, they said, held their worries. They would carry it until the weight became familiar. Then, at some quiet point along the road, they would release it into the forest, trusting the land to transform their burden into wisdom. As we drift deeper along this overgrown trail, the forest grows denser, its shadows longer, its air tinged with the cool scent of earth and hidden streams. The stones shift almost imperceptibly beneath our feet, as though responding to our presence, recognizing us perhaps as echoes of long-ago travelers. Here and there, we encounter faded carvings, symbols left not for announcement, but for remembrance. A crescent moon etched into a flat slab, a gentle spiral carved along the edge of a half-buried step. Figures, always walking, with bowed heads and outstretched hands. These carvings are delicate, softened by centuries of rain. They seem less like inscriptions and more like breaths captured in stone, as though the sculptors carved them not with tools, but with quiet moments, with devotion. Some scholars argue the spirals represent cycles of season, of life, of returning wisdom. Others believe they depict the movement of stars, mapping celestial paths that guided the pilgrims. But to the people who walked here, the carvings were less about meaning and more about presence. They marked the path not to instruct, but to accompany. For this was not a road meant to be traveled alone. This was a road meant to hold you, gently, as you walked. Yet as the narrative deepens, something sorrowful begins to rise, like mist lifting from the forest floor. The carvings grow sparser, the moss grows thicker, the air grows heavier, as if carrying a memory the forest hesitates to share. There are stories, whispers mostly, of a time when the pilgrims began to vanish. It began subtly. A single traveler who failed to return, A pair whose footprints disappeared halfway along the trail. A group whose lanterns were found abandoned, still warm, beside the road. The village elders sent search parties, walking the path in reverse, calling softly into the trees. But each search ended the same way, with no answers. Just the forest, breathing patiently, offering neither comfort nor explanation. Some believed the pilgrims had chosen to leave the world behind, drawn into the deep quiet of the forest, seeking truths too vast to share. Others feared a hidden danger, creatures unseen, shadows that swallowed sound, a presence in the deeper woods that pulled travelers away from waking life. But the most common belief, the one repeated by those who tended the village fires late into the night, was that the land itself had asked for silence. The world, they said, had grown tired of carrying the weight of unending footsteps, tired of receiving prayers it no longer knew how to answer. And so, the road was closed, not by decree, but by absence, by stillness, by a sudden hush that fell over the path like a slow closing veil. No more pilgrims departed from the village. No new carvings were etched. The final lanterns were left to extinguish themselves in the cool dusk air. And the forest, gentle, patient, ancient, took back its guardianship. Trees leaned inward. Vines reached down to caress the old stones. Moss settled like a soft blanket over the carvings. The path, once alive with purpose, became a memory, a forgotten breath in the soil. We walk deeper still, guided now not by carvings, but by intuition, by the faint sense that the road continues, even when the stones disappear entirely beneath roots and shadow. Here, the forest is thicker, darker, yet not unwelcoming. Its silence feels thoughtful, as though it listens to each step we take. You might feel, just beneath your heel, the slight give of soil softened by countless footsteps. You might sense the lingering warmth of prayers that once seeped into the ground. You might notice how the air shifts as you pass, cooler, then warmer, then still, as though brushing against the echoes of those who walked here long ago. There is a point, nearly invisible, where the road simply ends, not with a sign, not with a monument, just a gentle fading into earth. Here, vines obscure the last of the carvings. A half spiral, a crescent, a simple line. And around us, the forest holds its breath. Perhaps this is where the pilgrims' journeys ended. Perhaps this is where they released their final stones. Perhaps this is where the land whispered, "Enough." But of course, there are no answers, only possibilities held lightly in the evening air. As twilight deepens into night, the forest shifts into a softer register. Fireflies flicker like ancient lamps relit. The air cools and settles. The stones beneath us feel warmer now, as though they have absorbed the memory of our walk. And in this moment, when the world is neither fully awake nor fully dreaming, you may begin to sense something gentle rising from the road. A gratitude, perhaps, or a longing, or simply the echo of the many lives that once shaped this path. For though its purpose may never return, the road still remembers every footfall. Each stone holds the imprint of thousands of quiet steps. Each carving carries the breath of countless prayers. Each curve of the path folds the memory of a civilization that honored movement as sacred. And you, by walking here, give the road a moment of recognition, a whisper of life, a brief return of purpose. Perhaps that is enough. Perhaps the stones do not wait for pilgrims to return, but simply for someone to listen, to feel, to remember. As we retreat from the forest, the path slowly disappears behind us, swallowed once more by shadow and moss. Its stories settle back into the soil. Its silence deepens. But something stays with you, a softness, a quiet wonder, a sense of having touched a memory older than words. Perhaps it was never meant to be found. Perhaps it was meant only to be felt. For some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And somewhere beneath the twilight canopy, the stone road waits. Not for footsteps, but for stillness, for breath, for the tender presence of those who walk not to arrive, but simply to remember. It is said that in a land where the earth rises into a quiet crown of stone, there stands a mountain that breathes, not with the heaving chest of storms or the violence of fire, but with a slow and ancient rhythm, an exhale of cool air at dusk, an inhale of mist at dawn. Its peak is veiled more often than not, wrapped in drifting cloud, like a thought the sky cannot quite finish. At its base, where roots of rock sink deep into shadow, lies a narrow cleft in the stone. You would not notice it from a distance. It hides beneath an overhang of moss and ferns, where water trickles in silver threads. But if you step close, if you let your eyes adjust to the dimness, you will see it. A quiet doorway leading into darkness. Whispers tell us that this doorway is older than the mountain itself, that it marks an entrance not merely into the hill's interior, but into a time when stone was younger, more malleable, more willing to be shaped by hands that understood its secret grain. Tonight, we stand in the cool shadow of that mountain, listening to its gentle breath. The air at the entrance is different, cooler, yes, but also still, as though it holds its own memory separate from the world outside. If you place your hand upon the rock, you may feel a faint vibration, like a thought passing through stone. You may feel as though the mountain is aware of you, watching, waiting, and then, slowly, like a candle being carried into a darkened room, we step inside. The passage narrows at first, then widens, as though we are being swallowed and then gently held. The light from the outside fades behind us, replaced by a softer bluish gloom that seems to arise from the stone itself. The air is cool and dry, carrying the faintest scent of dust, lichen, and something else. Something like rain that fell a very long time ago. Folklore speaks of a chamber carved deep within this mountain. A chamber not chiseled by sight alone, but by an inner sense of sacred geometry. It is said that those who made this place did not simply look with their eyes. They listened with their bones, felt with their breath, and let their hands follow patterns whispered from within the earth. As we move deeper, the walls begin to change. At first, they are rough, bearing the natural jaggedness of ancient rock. Then, gradually, they become smoother, as though touched repeatedly by patient hands. Etched into this smooth stone are spirals, delicate and precise, winding along the passage in slow, thoughtful curves. These spirals resemble the paths of the wind as it curls around the mountain's flanks. They resemble currents of water, eddies in rivers, the slow unfurling of fern fronds. You might trace one with your fingertips and feel how naturally it flows, how it never stops abruptly, how it always turns back into itself, like breath returning to the lungs. The people who carved these lines, it is said, believed that the world spoke in spirals, that all things, storms, seasons, lives, even thoughts, moved in wide circling patterns, never quite repeating, but always returning. As the passage opens further, we come to small alcoves set into the walls. They are shaped like cupped hands, rounded, gentle, as though waiting to cradle something delicate. A lamp, a stone, a wish. Some still hold remnants of what might once have been offerings. Fragments of polished crystal. A feather turned to stone. Grains of sand fused into glass. Light would have rested here once, flickering softly on the carved spirals, sending their shadows dancing along the walls. Now, in the hush of our imagined lamplight, they appear as still dark pockets of memory. At last, the passage spills into a wide, open chamber. The air feels different here, deeper, somehow older. The floor beneath us is smooth and slightly concave, as if shaped to gather footsteps, to collect them like rain in a basin. The walls curve gently inward, embracing the space with a quiet tenderness. And above, high, almost unseen at first, the ceiling glimmers with countless stone points. They catch what little light we bring with us, reflecting it in tiny scattered sparks. It is as if the builders of this chamber peeled a portion of the night sky from above the mountain and pressed it gently into the stone overhead. The points form constellations, not quite the ones we know, but close enough to stir a feeling of recognition. Some stars are clustered, others standing alone. Thin lines, barely visible, connect a few of them in patterns that could be maps, or stories, or prayers. The arrangement feels intentional, but not rigid, like a hand-drawn chart of the heavens made by someone who had watched the sky for a very, very long time. The people who made this chamber believed that mountains were living beings. They believed the earth was not silent stone, but a body with bones and veins and breath. To them, this mountain was a wise elder, exhaling wisdom through its stone. They came here not to conquer it or mine it, but to listen, to press themselves into its interior and see what visions might rise from the deep. It is said they would gather within this chamber at certain times of the year, when the moon hung low over the peak, or when storms skirted the horizon without crossing it. They would descend in silence, carrying simple lamps, their light soft and golden against the cool blue of the stone. Inside, they would sit upon the floor, forming a wide circle beneath the mirrored constellations. Some placed their hands upon the ground, others upon the walls, as though completing a circuit between body and mountain. Then, in the hush that followed, they would breathe together, slow, deep. They did not ask questions. They did not speak desires aloud. They simply listened to the subtle creak of stone, to the distant rush of underground water, to the faint hum that seemed to rest in the chamber itself, like a note struck by an invisible hand and left to vibrate forever. Some who emerged from these gatherings claimed to have seen images in the darkness when their eyes were closed. Spirals of light, ancient landscapes, skies filled with unfamiliar stars. Others spoke of feeling thoughts not their own brush gently through their minds, leaving behind impressions of clarity, acceptance, or quiet understanding. Whether these experiences were visions granted by the mountain or simply the deep reflections of a community at peace with its own silence, no one can say. What is known, or at least believed, is that the people considered this chamber sacred, not because it was theirs, but because it reminded them they belonged to something larger. Something that moves slowly, patiently, like stone shifting beneath the continents. Over time, as with all things, change came. Clouds gathered differently. Seasons shifted their timing. The mountain's breath grew fainter. We do not know why the chamber was eventually sealed. No inscription announces the decision. No broken stone tablets record a final ceremony. One tale says that a tremor struck the region, and the people, fearful of collapse, abandoned their underground sanctuary. Another suggests that the community dwindled, not through disaster, but through quiet dispersal, families drifting away over generations until no one remained who remembered how to find the cleft in the stone. But there is another story, softer and more difficult to hold. It says that those who continued to listen in the chamber began to hear something new, a different kind of silence, not the comforting, enfolding stillness they had known before, but a silence so deep it felt like standing at the edge of a vast, unseen ocean. A silence that seemed to contain everything and nothing at once. Some found this silence overwhelming. Others found it beautiful beyond words. All agreed that it was not meant to be taken lightly. So, according to this tale, they made a choice. One night, under a sky thick with stars, they extinguished their lamps and left the chamber together. At the entrance, they paused. They placed their hands upon the stone, as if in gratitude, as if in farewell. Then they sealed the passage, not with force, but with deliberate kindness. Rocks were moved. Earth was packed. The cleft was left just visible enough for the mountain to remember, but hidden enough that those who did not know would pass it by. They believed, perhaps, that the silence they had touched was not yet meant for the world, that it was too vast for minds still tangled in daily concerns, that it would be better held within the mountain's steady heart, until a time when people might approach it with the tenderness it required. Now, as we stand in this imagined chamber, feeling its gentle hum, we are guests of a memory. The people who carved these spirals are gone. Their footsteps have faded. Their breath no longer warms the still air. Yet the spirals remain. The cupped alcoves remain. The stone stars overhead remain. Beneath the silence, something of them lingers, an intention, a gentleness, a reverence for quiet that feels almost like a blessing. If you close your eyes here, you might sense the curve of the mountain above you. You might feel the weight of rock, not as oppression, but as embrace. You might hear, faintly, the echo of breaths taken in unison long ago. And within that echo, you might sense the question that lives at the heart of this place. Did the chamber protect something sacred? Or did it hide a silence the world was not ready to hear? Perhaps both are true. Perhaps there is no difference between the two. Slowly now, gently, we make our way back along the passage. The spirals on the walls accompany us like soft currents, guiding rather than urging. The cool air begins to warm. The stone's interior hush thins, replaced by the subtler sounds of leaves and distant wind. At last, we step back through the narrow doorway and into the mountain's shadow once more. The sky has changed color. Clouds drift lazily around the peak, catching the light of a fading sun. The mountain breathes, cool air spilling down its flanks, brushing our skin with a sensation that feels strangely like farewell, or perhaps like welcome. It depends on how you listen. We leave the cleft behind, almost invisible now, beneath the overhang of moss and fern. The chamber returns to its long, undisturbed stillness. Its spirals rest in darkness. Its stone stars shine for no eyes at all. And yet, something has shifted. If not in the mountain, then in us. For though we carry no clear answers, no carved tablets of knowledge, we carry the memory of that deep, patient silence. The awareness that somewhere beneath the earth's surface, beneath layers of dust and time, there are places where people once listened instead of spoke, where they sought not to command the world, but to hear what it might be whispering. Perhaps it was never meant to be found again. Perhaps it waits only in stories, in dreams, in the subtle ache we feel when we look at mountains and sense that they know more than they say. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And so, as night begins to gather around the mountain's shoulders, we walk away, leaving the forgotten chamber beneath the mountain's breath to its long, gentle slumber. A dream carved into stone, a silence held in the earth's heart, a mystery that lingers, softly, like dawn fading from memory. It is said that in forgotten corners of the world, where dusk gathers in quiet layers and moonlight filters through cracked windows like a patient ghost, there lies an ancient table made of dark, time-worn wood. Its surface is scarred by blades, marked by candle heat, and softened by the palms of countless wanderers. And upon this table, resting as if it has never truly belonged anywhere else, lies a tattered map. At first, it appears like any relic of old cartographers: creased parchment, frayed edges, ink faded by years of handling. Yet, as the moon rises and spills silver light across the room, something strange begins to happen. The ink stirs. It trembles softly, as though waking from a long sleep. For a moment, the rivers seem to ripple, the mountains seem to breathe, and the thin black lines shimmer faintly, like veins of starlight woven through parchment. We begin here, in this hush between certainty and dream, in this room where the map whispers, where the world begins to shift before our eyes. Spread out along the table, its corners held down by old stones, polished smooth by generations of hands, the map seems almost alive. The ink has an iridescence to it, a faint glow, as though moonlight itself has seeped into each line. When you lean closer, you notice how delicate the strokes are, as if painted by a brush made of single strands of hair. But stranger still is how the lines refuse to remain still. A river bends subtly, curling into a form that resembles a spiral. A mountain range thins, shrinks, and then melts into open plain. Coastlines drift like the edges of clouds. And most striking of all, tiny clusters of dots, arranged like constellations, shift position. It is as though the map no longer reflects geography, but possibility. How, the chapter asks softly, can a map lead to a place that refuses to stay still? Ancient travelers once recorded stories of such shifting guides, maps that altered themselves under moonlight, not to deceive, but to reveal. These wanderers wrote of following ink lines that twisted with purpose, leading them not toward cities or mountains or islands, but toward the quiet truths they sought in their own hearts. To them, the map was not a tool. It was a companion, a teacher, a mirror. As we trace the ink with careful fingers, the landscape moves like breath beneath our touch. Rivers bend into spirals, spirals so perfect they seem more symbolic than natural. as though marking a place where the world curls inward on itself. Mountains vanish overnight, dissolving into thin strokes that drift toward the map's edge like stray thoughts. Paths appear, then vanish, islands drift across seas like wandering memories. And there, on the map's right side, we see markings that resemble star patterns. They glimmer faintly, arranged in constellations that no longer exist in the night sky. Ancient patterns, forgotten by time, preserved here as though the map alone remembers their rightful place. Some constellations align with rivers, others with mountain ridges. A few float in empty space, unanchored to any land. Were they meant to guide, or simply to remind us that the sky too has a geography, one written not in soil, but in light? As we observe the map more closely, we see that it shifts only under certain conditions. When the moon is strong, when silence fills the room, when the viewer's mind grows still enough to listen. It is said that those who approached the map with hurried thought saw only confusion, lines that tangled, shapes that blurred, a meaningless maze. But those who came with a patient heart, those who breathed slowly, who accepted the map's strangeness rather than resisting it, began to see meaning unfold. Whispers tell us that long ago, there existed a lineage of map makers, unlike any other. They did not measure distances with ropes or calculate angles beneath the sun. They believed the world itself was fluid, shifting with intention rather than with geological force. To them, a road existed only if one needed to walk it. A mountain rose only if one required a place to look outward. A forest thickened or parted depending on the knowledge sought by the traveler. These map makers believed that geography did not shape destiny. Destiny shaped geography. And so they crafted maps that were living things. Maps that responded. Maps that whispered. Maps that changed. To create such maps, they worked by the moonlight, using ink mixed from crushed minerals and the sap of rare trees. They whispered prayers into the strokes of their brushes, asking the world to reveal its hidden pathways. They studied not only the lay of the land, but the longings of the travelers who sought to cross it. It is said that a mapmaker could look at a wanderer's face and know exactly what direction the map would take when the moon touched its surface. Some followed the map to distant sanctuaries where ancient scrolls lay hidden beneath stone. Others were led to mountain peaks where constellations aligned with carvings older than recorded history. A few were led inward, to caves, to silence, to places where the world seemed to fold back upon itself, offering revelations as soft as breath. But many, perhaps most, followed the map only to discover that it guided them not to a physical location, but to a memory, to a forgotten truth, to a moment that needed to return to the surface of their lives. As we continue tracing the shifting ink, an emotional undercurrent begins to form. It feels like longing, quiet but persistent. A longing not for a destination, but for understanding. The map seems to sense this. Under our touch, a path begins to unfold, thin at first, barely more than a suggestion, then clearer, bending through lands that shift like fog. It leads toward a place marked only with a small symbol, a circle made of two spirals intertwined. This marking does not resemble mountains, or rivers, or cities. It resembles intention, or perhaps memory, or perhaps something the map cannot express through traditional means. We follow its winding path, letting our eyes glide over ink that glows softly under the moon. But each time we blink, the path shifts slightly, not enough to disorient, but enough to remind us that this journey is not fixed, that it depends on how we look, how we feel, how we listen. In this way, the map becomes less a piece of parchment and more a companion on the road. A reminder that the world, like the heart, is not a fixed thing, that meaning shifts under moonlight, that paths bend with time, that purpose reveals itself gradually, like ink rising beneath a brush dipped in water. As the chapter deepens, myths begin to surface. Stories passed down through ages with the softness of worn stone. One story tells of a traveler who sought a city said to contain a library of starlight. For years she chased rumors, following every map she could find, but the city eluded her. Only when she encountered the whispered map, alive with shifting ink, did she finally understand its truth. The city existed, but not in a single place. It appeared only to those who carried silence in their steps and openness in their hearts. The map did not lead her to the city. It taught her how to walk in a way that allowed the city to come to her. Another tale speaks of a wanderer who longed to find a river known for its healing waters. He followed the shifting lines through valleys and forests, until he realized that the river the map revealed was not one of water but of memory. When he finally reached its symbolic banks, he wept, not because he found what he sought, but because he found what he needed. A third legend tells of a mapmaker who tried to chart the shifting lines precisely, hoping to capture their magic in static form. But each time he drew the map's movements onto fresh parchment, the ink dried into meaningless shapes. Only when he surrendered his need to control did the original map reveal a path to him. A path that led not outward but inward into the quiet chambers of his own heart. These stories, tender and elusive, remind us that the truth of the map lies not in its ability to transport bodies, but in its ability to awaken souls. Now, as the moon climbs higher, the map reaches its brightest shimmer. Lines shift more rapidly, the ink glowing like distant constellations reflected on water. The rivers twist into elegant curls. Mountains shrink into faint marks, and the path we've been following dissolves into soft spirals that fade as quickly as they form. The map's final message is not one of arrival, it is one of surrender. For some journeys are not meant to end at a fixed point. Some destinations are not places, but moments, memories, awakenings, breaths. Perhaps the map was never designed to guide people through the world, but to guide them through themselves. And as the moonlight begins to fade from the room, the shimmering ink dims. The shifting lines blur softly, like thoughts drifting towards sleep, like tides ebbing back into the sea, like constellations dissolving into dawn. The map grows still. The parchment falls silent. Its mystery remains intact, veiled, patient, timeless. Perhaps it was never meant to be understood. Perhaps it was never meant to be followed. Perhaps it exists only for those willing to see beyond the surface of truth. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Some maps only reveal themselves when we stop searching for land and begin searching for meaning. And so, with the moon slipping behind the clouds and the room growing dim again, we step away from the table, leaving the whispered map to its long shifting dream. A dream of paths that move like thoughts. A dream of places that appear only when needed. A dream of journeys that guide the heart, even when the destination remains forever out of reach. It is said that in a wide and wind-worn valley, one cradled between mountains that rise like slow thoughts drifting into the sky. There stands a temple older than the villages that surround it, older even than the stories that try to recall its beginnings. At dusk, when the horizon softens into muted gold and pale violet, the temple appears to breathe. Smoke lifts from its ancient braziers in thin, wandering ribbons, curling through the air like memories reluctant to disperse. These braziers have burned for centuries, though no one living remembers tending them. Their flames are not fierce, not wild, not meant to devour. They are gentle, so gentle that the elders of nearby settlements once called them soft fire. A flame that warms without consuming, that glows without demanding attention. To stand near one is to feel a quietness settle into the bones, as though the fire recognizes the weight you carry and offers a moment of release. Tonight, we step into the valley. Dusk folds itself into the first breath of night. The air carries the scent of cool stone and distant cedar. The drifting smoke gathers in loose veils, surround the temple's outer walls, softening their edges until the structure seems less carved than dreamed. The sky is dimming, but the firelight is enough to guide us toward the entrance. A wide archway framed by shadows that move as though stirred by a rhythm we cannot hear. In forgotten corners of the earth, places like this remain untouched by haste. Time enters slowly, like a visitor waiting for permission. And so we move slowly too, letting the valley's hush settle over us like a long unspoken blessing. The stone beneath our feet is cool, worn smooth by generations of pilgrims, priests, and wanderers whose names have slipped quietly from memory. The entrance corridor is narrow, designed to shift one's pace into reverence. Along the walls, faint carvings linger, spirals, crescents, and patterns of parallel lines that resemble the drift of the smoke itself. The air grows warmer as we approach the first of the temple's inner chambers, where the trembling embers cast small pools of amber light across the floor. These embers flicker in slow, thoughtful rhythms, forming patterns on the stones as intricate as any written scripture. Long ago, it is said, the priests of this temple studied not the flames but the shadows they cast. For it was believed that truth dwelled not in brightness or darkness alone, but in the meeting point where one gave way to the other. This belief shaped everything within the temple. The angles of its corridors, the curves of its archways, the placement of each brazier, every detail, down to the smallest crack in the floor, was aligned to create dances of light and shadow that changed with the hours. We pause in the first chamber, letting our eyes adjust to the dim glow. Before us, tall columns rise like silent sentinels, their surfaces covered with runes that resemble flame caught mid-flow. The embers in this room burn low, casting long shadows that stretch across the far wall. The patterns shift slowly as the smoke moves, revealing and hiding symbols carved into the stone. Symbols we cannot fully decipher, yet feel drawn toward. There is something tender here, something contemplative, as though the room remembers the presence of those who once gathered in its embrace. As we walk deeper into the temple, the corridors widen. The soft fire glows more brightly here, not with intensity, but with presence. The shadows it creates feel purposeful, as if shaped by an unseen hand. We notice alcoves carved into the walls, each containing a shallow basin filled with ash. In some, the ash is smooth and untouched. In others, it bears traces of long-faded markings. Perhaps the remains of rituals performed by the priests. Perhaps symbols traced by pilgrims seeking guidance. Whispers tell us that the priesthood devoted to this temple followed a doctrine unlike any other. They believed in balance, not the kind achieved through strict discipline or rigid structure, but the kind that arises when opposites meet in peace. To them, fire was not a destroyer, shadow was not a threat. Together, the two formed a dialogue, one illuminating, one concealing, each reflecting the other's meaning. Their rituals were performed at night, when the flames were at their softest and the shadows longest. The priests would stand before the braziers, hands outstretched, waiting for the thin drift of smoke to reveal certain patterns upon their palms. These patterns were interpreted not as omens, but as reflections of the inner self. A thought caught between certainty and doubt. A choice hesitating in the mind's quiet chambers. A memory resurfacing after years under layers of dust. They listened to these patterns as one might listen to a friend's voice, patiently, without judgment, with a reverence for the subtleties of emotion. Some said the priests could read truths no words could express. Others claimed they merely guided travelers to read themselves more clearly. Whatever the case, those who visited the temple often left with softer eyes, their burdens eased by the hush of the corridors and the flicker of the soft fire. Yet as the narrative deepens, contradictions rise like hidden ripples beneath calm water. Scrolls found centuries later, buried in sealed chambers behind crumbling walls, speak of rituals meant to continue forever. Nightly ceremonies, eternal tending of the fire, a commitment passed from priest to priest, generation after generation, as steady as breath itself. But the temple, as we find it now, tells a different story. There are no priests, no ceremonial tools, no fresh ash in the basins, only the lingering warmth of a flame that should have gone cold long ago. And most puzzling of all, no signs of struggle, no evidence of sudden disaster or invasion. The chambers appear untouched, as though the inhabitants simply walked away one evening and never returned. The soft fire continued burning in their absence, its purpose unclear, but its presence unwavering. What happened here? What could cause a community so devoted to balance, so meticulous, so contemplative, to abandon its sacred place in a single night? Some historians suggest drought or resource loss, but there are no records of famine. Others imagine internal conflict, though no damage or graffiti suggests unrest. A few claim the priests simply dispersed when their rituals lost meaning, though the embers that still glow seem to argue otherwise. Perhaps the true reason is something gentler, something less dramatic, something the world rarely recognizes as reason enough. Perhaps the priests simply felt the fire dim within themselves, not extinguished, just softened, as though their calling was complete, as though they had listened long enough, as though the temple's purpose had been fulfilled, even if no one understood it clearly. When a community built on silence and contemplation makes a collective decision, it leaves behind no loud mark, only traces, only tender remnants, only the faint sigh of purpose settling into rest. We reach the deepest chamber now, where the shadows gather in a spiral pattern along the Kyonsin tulls. The floor slopes gently inward, forming a circular space at the center. Here, the largest brazier stands alone, its flames soft yet steady, casting a warm glow that pulses rhythmically, like a heartbeat slowed almost to sleep. The walls around the chamber are covered in carvings, some crisp, some softened by time. They depict figures standing before flame, reaching towards shadow, bowing their heads, as smoke curls above them like drifting thought. Some figures are alone. Others stand in circles. None appear distressed. All appear serene. This room, it seems, was their sanctuary, their final gathering place. If you close your eyes, you may sense the echo of their presence, gentle, like the brush of a sleeve in passing. You may imagine them standing here in the final hours of their time, realizing that the balance they sought had reached a new point of meaning, that their role was no longer to tend the flame, but to release it. Perhaps they extinguished their last doubts here. Perhaps they set aside the scrolls, content to let silence complete the teachings they could not. Perhaps they walked out together, leaving the fire to burn quietly for whoever might come next. As we step back through the corridors, the soft fire trembles in its basins, casting faint patterns on the stone. These patterns drift across our faces like memories searching for a place to rest. The smoke follows us gently, spiraling upward, catching the last ambient light as though reluctant to let us go. Outside, dusk has deepened into night. The valley is cooler now. The braziers outside the temple glow like fallen stars resting on the earth. Their smoke drifts into the sky, dissolving into the darkness, carrying with it whatever stories remain untold. We stand for a moment at the threshold, listening. Beneath the silence, the fire still whispers. Where memory fades, meaning lingers. Between brightness and shadow, truth shimmers. Subtle, patient, waiting for those who approach without expectation. Perhaps it was never meant to be found clearly. Perhaps the temple exists only to remind us that understanding often lies at the meeting point of opposites. As the smoke rises softly into the night, we drift with it, carried on the breath of centuries, pondering how meaning flickers quietly between what is seen and what is allowed to fade. It is said that in a quiet fold of the earth, where hills rise like sleeping giants and valleys hold the dusk as though cupping a fragile flame, there lingers a single trembling note, one that drifts across the twilight air, soft as breath, thin as a thread of silk. A note so delicate it could be mistaken for a trick of the wind, yet so insistent it feels like the world itself, inhaling a memory long forgotten. Tonight, we begin with that sound, one shimmering tone, suspended in the fading light, calling us toward a place where silence has grown thick with centuries, and only the faintest echo remains of what once was. Follow it gently, let it carry you, for this note, whispers tell us, is the last remnant of a kingdom lost to time. A kingdom whose history was not carved in stone, nor written on parchment, but sung. In forgotten corners of the earth, people speak of a land where every soul was born with a melody, a quiet, invisible song that unfurled the moment a child took their first breath. This melody was said to be a companion for life, guiding choices, shaping dreams, rising and falling with the rhythms of the heart. Some melodies were bright, like morning sunlight glancing off river water. Some were deep, resonant, like the low hum of thunder beneath distant mountains. Some flickered gently, like starlight hesitant to settle in the sky. Whatever form they took, these songs belonged wholly to each person, yet harmonized together in a way that seemed impossible in the world we know. For this vanished kingdom believed that music was the true language of existence, more ancient than words, more faithful than memory, more enduring than stone. Their cities, it is said, were built according to sound rather than sight. The layout of streets followed gentle arcs meant to echo the curve of a harp string. Towers rose at distances that allowed the wind to slip between them with a soft whistle. Even their bridges had subtle undulations carved into their sides, producing faint tones when the breeze passed through. Walking through such a city must have felt like walking inside a living instrument, each step bringing forth quiet harmony, each breath resonating with the world around you. Tonight, we follow the trembling note deeper into the valley, moving past low hills and clusters of trees whose branches sway with a rhythm reminiscent of old lullabies. The light is dim now, the sky tinged with dusky blue. In the distance, the first faint shadows of fallen walls begin to appear. We have reached the ruins, what remains of the kingdom that left only a song. The stones that scatter the valley floor are not arranged in any recognizable pattern. Time has softened their edges and scattered them like forgotten pages of a once beloved book. And yet, if you look closely, if you kneel and brush aside the thin veil of moss, you may see faint carvings etched into their surfaces. Not symbols, not letters, but waves, delicate rippling grooves curve across the stones like frozen music. They widen and narrow, rising and falling with the precision of sound itself. These carvings once captured the melodies of the people. They were visual echoes of their inner songs. Some stones hold tight, compressed waves, perhaps belonging to someone with a voice that trembled with emotion. Others show long sweeping lines, perhaps the imprint of a mind at ease. And some show layered ripples, one melody woven into another, like the joining of two lives. The kingdom believed these carvings kept the memory of the people alive, even after voices fell silent. For music, they said, does not truly disappear. It only hides in places where the world's noise cannot reach. As we wander through the ruins, the gentle note continues to follow us, weaving between fallen pillars and shallow depressions where halls once stood. Its tone wavers slightly, almost as though responding to our presence. In the roots of a fallen cedar, you see something strange. A piece of wood, shaped with such elaborate curvature, it can only be an instrument. Perhaps a lyre, perhaps a flute. But it has fossilized. The strings, once stretched taut with song, have become thin ridges of stone. The hollow body has filled with soil and minerals. It rests beneath the roots like a relic the tree has chosen to carry. An old companion the earth was unwilling to let fade entirely. Nearby, half buried beneath a blanket of dry leaves, lies another instrument, a carved horn made of clay and bone. Its mouth is chipped, its shape warped by centuries of earth pressure. Yet the craftsmanship is unmistakable. It once sang in gatherings where voices joined in spiraling harmony, calling stories into the night air. As the twilight deepens, we move toward what appears to be the remnants of a central hall. Its foundation stones form a wide circle, and at the center lies a flat slab, smooth and pale as moonlit water. Around the slab, carved into the ground itself, is a spiraling pattern, wide at the outer edge, tightening toward the center. A spiral, always the spiral, the shape of breath, the shape of music, the shape of time. Some believe this hall was where the kingdom gathered for moments of great significance. Births, departures, the rare moments when a new harmony was discovered or a voice returned from silence. Others believe it was where the final chorus was sung, the one whispered about in legends. It is said that when the kingdom realized its time was ending, how no one knows, they gathered here as the last light of day touched the horizon. Hundreds of voices rose into the air, some bright, some low, some trembling with emotion, all woven together in a tapestry of sound so vast, so gentle, so complete, that even the mountains listened. The people believed that by joining their melodies into one, they would leave behind a song powerful enough to hold their memory long after their bodies turned to dust. That song, some say, is the note that still trembles across the valley. A single thread of a long-lost chorus. A final echo of a kingdom that refused to disappear entirely. The emotional arc deepens now, not in sorrow but in tenderness. There is something beautiful in a people who chose to leave a song instead of stone. Something human in their belief that memory is held not by monuments, but by breath. As the wind moves across the valley, the trembling note wavers. It stretches, then contracts. It fades, then returns, shy yet unwavering. Perhaps the wind carries it. Perhaps the ruins create a natural resonance that amplifies it. Or perhaps it is something more, a reminder shaped by the earth, preserved by time, offered to anyone willing to listen. The carved stones seem to vibrate subtly. The fossilized instruments gleam faintly in the deepening dusk. Even the shadows among the ruins shift with a rhythm that feels almost musical, as if the kingdom's song still lingers, hovering between worlds, waiting for recognition. We pause near the spiral hall, letting the last remnants of twilight settle around us like a curtain falling at the end of a performance. The trembling note seems close now, as though it hovers just behind our breath. What if this kingdom is not truly gone? What if its song is more enduring than stone ever could be? What if memory cannot fade when carried on the wind, echoed by roots, etched into the earth? Perhaps the people who lived here understood something we often forget, that existence is not measured in monuments, but in the quiet impact of voices joined together, that a kingdom's true legacy is not its walls or its wealth, but the way it made the world tremble, softly, gently, with the resonance of its presence. And perhaps too they understood that some stories were never meant to be fully known, only felt, only heard, like a note drifting through twilight, belonging to no single place, yet touching everything it passes. As the night deepens, the trembling note thins into a whisper. The valley cools. Crickets begin their soft chorus. A faint mist rises from the earth. The ruins, though silent, feel awake, holding their breath, listening with us. And as we turn to leave, the note fades into stillness. Not vanished, not silenced, simply resting, waiting for the next listener, for the next twilight, for the next moment when the world grows quiet enough to hear. Perhaps it was never meant to be found in its entirety. Perhaps it lives on precisely because it remains unfinished, unresolved, a lingering thread of a melody that refuses to close its final chord. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And in this valley, beneath this sky, the vanished kingdom continues. Not in stone, not in memory, but in a single trembling note that drifts gently across the dusk. It is said that on certain nights, when the wind grows tired and the land lies very still, the sky forgets to pretend that it is fixed. The constellations loosen their edges. Lines once drawn with such certainty between one star and the next begin to waver, drift, and soften. If you stand beneath such a sky, far from the weight of cities and their restless light, you may feel something strange, a sense that the heavens above you are not a picture, but a thought. Not a map, but a question. Tonight, we begin beneath such a sky, a night dome scattered with constellations that seem to shift like drifting thoughts. At first, you recognize familiar patterns, a curve that resembles a hunter's bow, a cluster that might be a crown, a long, straight line of stars that could belong to some long-named creature. But if you look a little longer, if you let your gaze rest without grasping, the patterns begin to blur. The hunter's bow slackens, the crown tilts and dissolves. The creature unravels into a scattering of unconnected lights. Above you, the stars seem to move, not quickly, not with the obvious sweep of planets or meteors, but with the gentle uncertainty of a memory trying to recall itself. In forgotten ages, ancient astronomers gazed up at this same sky and recorded something that unsettles us even now. They wrote that the heavens themselves changed shape during a certain era, a span of years whose exact dates have faded from history. They claimed that constellations wandered, that their stories rewrote themselves in slow, luminous strokes. To them, it was as if the stars wished to rearrange their legends, as if the sky itself had grown weary of a single narrative. We follow these old astronomers now, not with telescopes or equations, but with the quiet of our own attention. High above a restless ocean, there stands a cliff face that drops sharply into waves, carved into the stone, halfway between sea and sky. Rests an observatory so old that birds have claimed its ledges and moss has softened its edges. Its entrance is a simple arch, hewn into the rock by hands that trusted the cliff to hold their weight and their longing. It is said that those who built this observatory believed the best place to study the heavens was where Earth risked falling into emptiness, where the line between ground and air narrowed to a thin, trembling edge. You step inside. The passageway is cool, smelling faintly of salt and lichen. Light enters through narrow slits in the stone, painting long vertical lines across the floor. As you climb a set of the worn steps, the air grows thinner, the silence deeper. At the top, the passage opens into a circular chamber, open to the sky. Here, the walls are carved with careful, patient marks. Rings and teens and small dots arranged in patterns that mimic the stars above. Yet as you compare these carvings to the sky, you notice something unsettling. They do not align with any constellation you know. The clusters are close, but always slightly wrong. A familiar pattern is missing a star. Another has gained one. Paths that should be straight are bent into arcs. To modern eyes, the carvings look like mistakes. But the hands that etched them did not think so. Whispers tell us that in this observatory, sky watchers once gathered nightly to trace the movements of the stars by firelight. They wore simple cloaks against the wind and carried polished stone tablets and brushes dipped in dark pigment. They did not hurry. The sky, they believed, did nothing quickly, and so neither should they. These ancient astronomers, though perhaps they would not have used that word, believed the stars were conscious beings. Not gods, not rulers, but luminous minds. Watchful, old, patient. They studied the night not only to mark seasons or navigate oceans, but to listen, to read, in patterns of light, messages they believed the heavens were sending to the earth. When a star brightened unexpectedly, they saw it as emphasis. When one dimmed, they treated it as a pause. When constellations drifted, ever so slightly, from their familiar positions, they recorded the change with quiet care, as if noting a shift in a friend's expression. Their scrolls speak of a time for when the sky seemed restless, when constellations long considered stable began to flex and wander. Lines between stars broke apart and redrew themselves. A figure once interpreted as a lion slowly lost its shape, its stars bleeding outward until it resembled a scattering of seeds on the wind. Another, once seen as a boat, gained new lights along its rim, as though sprouting wings. The sky watchers did not call this chaos. They called it rewriting. They believed the stars were revising their stories, sending warnings in veiled form, that perhaps the land had forgotten something, and the sky, in its slow, luminous way, was trying to remind it. From the cliff observatory, our journey drifts inland, across rolling fields and dark forests, toward a plateau crowned with stone circles. On this plateau, under a sky that feels closer than it does anywhere else, stand rings of upright stones, each as tall as a person, their surfaces marked with shallow carvings. Some are spirals, some are straight lines, some are clusters of tiny, precise indentations. The stones form concentric circles, one within the other, with a flat, open center. On certain nights of the year, it is said, if you lie in the center of the rings and look straight up, the stars above align with the carved patterns on the stone, but not in the way modern astronomers expect. The constellations that match these carvings are not the ones we know. They do not correspond neatly to our charts. Instead, they form unfamiliar shapes. Long sweeping arcs, tight clusters around empty spaces, spirals that curl toward invisible centers. To the people who stood here millennia ago, these shapes were not errors. They were messages. Some scholars suggest that these stones record the sky at a different angle, or from a different latitude, or through some atmospheric shift. Others argue that they may preserve memories of supernova or distant celestial events now faded from view. But the myths tied to this plateau speak in gentler terms. They say that when the stars refused to hold their shape, when familiar patterns trembled and changed, sky watchers gathered here not in fear, but in contemplation. They stood between the stones and let the altered constellations wash over them like a slow tide. They listened with their eyes. They considered the possibility that the universe was not only vast, but alive. Some believed the shifting constellations were warnings, gentle, luminous cautions as about forgetting the balance between earth and sky. Others believed they were invitations, urging humankind to release old stories that no longer fit, to make room for new ways of seeing. And some, perhaps the quietest among them, believed the stars were simply changing because everything does, because nothing, not even the heavens, is meant to remain fixed forever. As we move deeper into this soft, meditative mystery, old scrolls begin to unroll in our imagination. On brittle parchment, written in fine, careful strokes, we see star maps that contradict everything modern scholars accept. The shapes they depict fit no known system. Lines connect stars we have never thought to link. Regions considered empty are marked with delicate clusters of ink, as though recording lights too faint for the naked eye. One scroll shows 3 familiar constellations, ones we can identify even now. But they overlap, their outlines woven together like threads. Another erases the boundaries between figures entirely, revealing the sky as a single sprawling tapestry with no clean separation of stories. To us, conditioned to stable charts and textbook diagrams, these maps appear almost chaotic. To those who drew them, they were faithful portraits of a sky in motion. Why do they not match our understanding? Did the stars truly shift? Did new ones flare to life while others faded away? Or did the ancient sky watchers see patterns we no longer recognize? Patterns not of shape, but of meaning. Perhaps their maps were less about physical position and more about relationship, less about measurement and more about conversation. A star near the horizon might be linked to one overhead, not because they align neatly, but because their light arrived together at a crucial moment. A storm, a birth, a turning point in the land's story. In this way, their sky was a living text, rewritten by each night, reinterpreted by each generation. As the night grows older, the stars above us seem to quiet. Their drifting uncertainty settles into a kind of stillness. Not the stillness of rigidity, but the stillness of acceptance. We lie back now, on a patch of cool grass within one of the stone circles, and simply look. The stones at the edge of our vision frame the sky like an ancient doorway. The constellations are both familiar and strange. Here, a shape you recognize but slightly altered. There, a cluster that seems new, but might simply be one you've never noticed. And in this moment, beneath the shifting sky, a thought begins to unfold, slowly, gently, like a scroll unrolling under careful hands. Perhaps the stars never changed at all. Perhaps their positions shifted only in the way all things do over great oceans of time, drifting in patterns too vast for a single lifetime to perceive. Perhaps the true change happened not in the heavens, but in us, in our stories, in our eyes, in the meanings we chose to draw between points of light. Ancient skywatchers saw warnings, invitations, conversations in the constellations. They read the heavens as a living book. We, over centuries, have smoothed those stories into charts, fixed their shapes in manuals, named their figures and insisted they remain what we have decided they are. But the sky above us has never agreed to be still. It has never signed its name on our diagrams. It continues to glow, to drift, to hum its silent music across the dark, indifferent to our lines, our labels, our certainty. Beneath the silence, something vast presses at the edges of comprehension. You feel it now, lying there with the earth beneath your back and the sky above your face. A sense that the unknown is not a blank space to be filled, but a depth to be honored. That there will always be constellations we cannot quite name, patterns we half recognize, stories the stars are telling that have nothing to do with us at all. And somehow, that is a comfort. For it means the universe is larger than our fears, wider than our conclusions. It means there is room, endless room, for new understanding, for new ways of seeing. The emotional journey that began in wonder settles now into reflective stillness. Your breathing slows to match the rhythm of the night. The stones around you grow darker, their carvings blending into shadow. The stars above, refusing to hold their shape, shimmer softly as though caught between one story and the next. Perhaps they are not rewriting at all. Perhaps they are simply continuing to be what they have always been. Light crossing unimaginable distances, arriving in our eyes as questions rather than answers. At last we rise, slowly. The air is cool. The ground is firm. The sky, as always, remains beyond our reach. As we take one last look upward, a soft exhale seems to pass through the world. Through the grass, the stones, the distant cliffs, the quiet observatories sleeping in their cradles of rock. We leave the plateau, and the stars continue their silent drifting. We leave the old scrolls and carved circles, and the sky remains. Perhaps the stars never changed, but our understanding of them did, shifting and wandering over centuries like constellations in a dream. And somewhere between what we once believed and what we think we know now, in that gentle meeting point, wonder remains. A small, steady light refusing, in its own quiet way, to hold a single shape.